You know what? I'll just bring this up with me.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Hope you're enjoying breakfast. I'm Nick Henner with ACEEE and here to welcome everyone to day 2 of our finance forum. A quick housekeeping, I want to kindly ask that everyone fills out our conference survey in the app and let us know how great of a job we're doing, or if you have some other critical feedback, it's okay too. But I hope everyone else had a great day 1 of Finance Forum. I know I have a page worth of interesting people and topics to follow up on. This is a lot more fun than Zoom, right? And if you weren't here yesterday, that's okay, because we have an excellent day of content planned for today that I'm really excited about. I won't delay that too much longer, but I just want to share in ACEE's 2021 call to action. It starts off with, our vision is to scale up energy efficiency and equitably reduce GHG emissions and combat climate change, and to do so in a way that benefits the economically insecure. And that last point is what we'll be talking about this morning. And to that, it's my privilege to introduce the moderator for our opening keynote session, Executive Director and founder of Clean Energy Works, Holmes Hummel.
Good morning, everyone. How did everyone enjoy day 1 of the Finance Forum? I've only attended a few of the 14 finance forums, but I have found them to be so beneficial. And that was true for me last night with the evening reception, encounter after encounter of top flight people in our field. And I'll have to say that though I didn't miss the demands of travel during the pandemic, I really did miss seeing many of you. And I really enjoyed meeting new people that I hadn't seen at previous finance forums last evening. So I wanted to ask this morning, how many people are attending the first ACEEE Finance Forum? Fantastic. I think it's a sign of the times. The flood of new people and new interest, and particularly in the themes that Nick Henner has represented ACEEE prioritizing for the Finance Forum's Day 2 keynote. I had the honor of serving as a member of the advisory committee for the Finance Forum this year, which meant that, well, you've served on these types of committees. You volunteer for some additional phone calls, some additional emails. And as I listened to the ideas pour through these conference calls from the experts that ACEEE can convene from across the country, many of those ideas are reflected on the Finance Forum program, and it was the recently departed Executive Director for the Coalition for Green Capital, Jeff Schub, who paused the conversation after about halfway through the first meeting of the advisory committee and said, "But Nick, we have to have equity as a theme running through all of this." And I'm going to tell Jeff that you led the applause. He has just departed his role at the Coalition for Green Capital, and I know they're in a search for his replacement there that would be hard to find. But the Coalition for Green Capital has been a force in our field for finance and equitable finance, and ACEEE heard that message, heeded the call to action. You can see it in the panel sessions today. And I'm so pleased to be introducing to you now the opening keynote, Dr. Tony Reams. Dr. Reams is a scholar and a government advisor currently serving in the Biden-Harris administration as the Senior Advisor on Energy Justice in the Department of Energy's Office of Economic Impact and Diversity. He is the founder of the new Office of Energy Justice Policy and Analysis. Prior to serving as an appointee, he has been an assistant professor and director of the Urban Energy Justice Lab at the University of Michigan School of Environment and Sustainability. In addition to his service to the federal government, Dr. Reams has advised state and local governments also. Like many of you, he has served in support of a governor's a governor's administration, including Governor Whitner's Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice, and the governor's Climate Justice Brain Trust. He's also been a member of the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services Weatherization Policy Advisory Council, and he's worked with the cities of Detroit and Ann Arbor in implementing equitable climate action plans for affordable and energy-efficient housing. Yesterday, I was in a lovely part of the reception where people from Kansas and Michigan were arguing about who has bigger claim to Dr. Reams's career at this point. He graduated with a Doctor of Philosophy and Public Administration from the University of Kansas and a Master of Engineering Management from Kansas State University, a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from North Carolina A&T University, and of course, he's now a professor at University of Michigan. Dr. Reams's research investigates the fair and equitable access to affordable, reliable, clean energy and explores the production and persistence of energy disparities across race, class, and place. Dr. Reams really wanted to be able to join us in person today. He had a combination of both a scheduling conflict and then the misfortune of contracting COVID just over the weekend. So we are doubly fortunate that he recorded a message just for us. We're fortunate now to hear for Dr. Reams' recorded 17-minute keynote address specifically to you. He really did want to attend in person, as you'll hear at the end. And following his remarks, I'll be joined on stage by NYSERDA's Senior Advisor Greg Hale and entrepreneur Tammy Agard to delve into his key messages and involve you more in the dialogue. Thank you so much. Let's play Dr. Reams' remarks.
Hello, I am Tony Reams, Senior Advisor on Energy Justice at the U.S. Department of Energy. I want to thank ACEEE for this invitation and to congratulate you on your 14th convening of the Energy Efficiency Finance Forum. I bring you all greetings on behalf of Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm. At the Department of Energy, innovation and energy justice are at the forefront of our mission. That is why this year, DOE's Office of Economic Impact and Diversity established the brand new Office of Energy Justice Policy and Analysis, which I am excited to lead. In our office, we are laser focused on implementing President Biden's Justice 40 initiative and creating policy frameworks to address everything from how we permanently reduce energy burdens to how we increase access to low-cost capital for clean energy investments in underserved communities. Which brings me to our conversation today. I cut my teeth on energy justice work on this issue of access and participation in energy efficiency programs. As a young doctoral student during the economic recession, I was curious how the federal economic stimulus combined with public and private investments could lead to a renewed focus on energy efficiency in underserved communities. It was during my investigation that I learned that we have a problem. I remember speaking with an elderly woman in Kansas City who was cautious about new programs to make her home more efficient. She told me a story about taking out a second mortgage on her home during the energy conservation efforts of the 1980s. As we sat on her front porch, she pointed out to me house after house of neighbors who were foreclosed on after participating in similar programs. So here we are, in a similar space, at a similar time, with a renewed focus on clean energy, rising energy costs, and increasing numbers of households experiencing energy insecurity. 31% of households are reducing or foregoing basic necessities like food or medicine. 21% of households are unable to pay their utility bills. 20% of households are experiencing unhealthy indoor temperatures just to afford energy costs. And these are not only low-income households. Plus, we have the added pressure of addressing climate change by drastically decarbonizing our existing building stock. Yet thankfully, for every set of problems, there are solutions. And the people in this room today are just the ones to develop those solutions. In week one, President Biden set the nation's climate and energy policy on a compass headed toward advancing equity with his Executive Order 14008, tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad, which among other things established the Justice 40 initiative. With Justice 40, President Biden and Secretary Granholm have expressed a commitment to environmental, energy, and climate justice, directing that at least 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal investments must flow to disadvantaged communities. These communities are identified as census tracts across the country with certain characteristics that disproportionately render them environmentally, economically, and socially vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Through a whole of government approach, each federal agency must play a part in remedying harms in communities that have been historically marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by our energy system and pollution. The scope of Justice 40 is broad, including not only investments in clean energy and energy efficiency, but also workforce development and the assurance of affordable and sustainable housing. At the Department of Energy, we established 8 policy priorities to guide our Justice 40 implementation across the department, our national labs, and funding recipients. Among the 8 priorities, 2 are very relevant to our conversation today. First, research shows that clear income, racial, and geographic disparities exist for who is less likely to have access to and participate in clean energy programs. Therefore, we need to set goals to increase parity in clean energy technology access and adoption. Second, for most households, there are costs associated with participating in these programs. Thus, we need to be innovative in our financial instruments that provide access to low-cost capital for energy efficiency investments. While federal commitments and funding to address climate change and equity are creating new opportunities, they are ultimately not sufficient to assure the depth of inclusion and the scale necessary for true equity in our clean energy transition. We need both funding and financing solutions. That is why this keynote is entitled Bridging the Gap. It's because everything that we know about funding and financing together still hasn't been enough. And here at the Finance Forum, I know you all know that. So before joining the Department of Energy, my Urban Energy Justice Lab at the University of Michigan worked to understand the production and persistence of the daily energy challenges that so many American households face. This included our study to define what we call the energy efficiency donut hole, or a financing coverage gap. Our definition was based on eligibility criteria. With federal assistance for low-income households on one side and traditional consumer financing products for credit-worthy households on the other side, we wanted to estimate the number of households without access to capital for efficiency upgrades. We applied this question to the state of Michigan. Based on census data and anonymized applicant data from Michigan Saves, we found that 1 in 8 Michigan households fell through the donut hole, meaning they were not eligible for any funding or financing. Thus, on eligibility grounds alone, across the country, we are likely leaving millions of households out of the transition to a cleaner energy future. But that doesn't mean that the other 7 out of 8 are actually going to or even can use the funding or financing options which they would be eligible for. Yes, we know eligibility is a critical criteria for determining access, yet there are additional factors that affect whether a financial solution will be available and whether it will be accepted. Over the next few slides, I'll help bring this into focus. On the funding side of the donut hole, federal funding for efficiency upgrades to low-income households have by far been below the level to meet the need. For a Resource for the Future report, my colleagues and I calculated that DOE's Weatherization Assistance Program for low-income households would need $17 billion per year for the next 15 years to reach all eligible households. For some perspective, the recently passed bipartisan infrastructure bill appropriated a one-time investment of just $3.5 billion to be spent over the next 5 years. Utility ratepayer funds are also insufficient and have not been equitably distributed. At the University of Michigan, we analyzed investments by 11 investor-owned utilities into their low-income energy efficiency programs, as proportional to their low-income population in the utility territory. And we found that most utilities were investing at below equitable levels. In Michigan alone, the gap between equitable investment levels and actual investment was $73.4 million. And the cumulative deficit for the 11 IOUs we analyzed was a $585 million underinvestment between 2012 and 2021. So while we should advance equity by shifting government and ratepayer funded programs, that alone is not sufficient when the total amount of capital reaching communities is far too small. More than a decade ago, the Department of Energy formed the State and Local Energy Efficiency Action Network. The group recently commissioned a review of state-backed loan programs that were started either during or just before the Recovery Act era. At the time, these loan programs represented the best hope for demonstrating the ability to leverage private capital with federal funding. Earlier this year, researchers at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab published a 10-year retrospective on these surviving loan programs. They found that first, across all 4 states studied, programs reached less than 0.1% of households in their state in every year, and no program reached 1% of households within a 10-year horizon. So let's think about this. If we stayed on this trajectory for a century, these programs are all on pace for reaching less than 10% of the households in their state. Second, of the households that did benefit from these loan programs, 90% of the borrowers had credit scores that were prime, super prime, or beyond super prime. Now keep in mind, these market segments are not the ones historically underserved by financial services. Taking these observations on funding and financing for energy efficiency together, we can revisit the donut hole to consider additional factors. The fraction of households qualified for funding on the left is effectively made thinner by the lack of adequate government or ratepayer funding to reach them. The fraction of households qualified for financing on the right is also effectively made thinner by the robust finding that the vast majority of qualified households will not seek or accept indebtedness for the sake of an energy efficiency upgrade, even one that is cost effective. So in this case, we may end up with something that more likely resembles an onion ring. Increasing access to energy efficiency is a whole of government approach. At the Department of Energy's Better Building Summit last year, EPA Administrator Michael Regan spoke about inclusive utility investments. He said, "We are working on accelerating emerging models of success at expanding the scale of efficiency deployment in underserved and overburdened communities, such as inclusive utility investment approaches with robust consumer protections like the pay-as-you-saves model." EPA also launched a resource hub for inclusive utility investments so folks can learn more about it. The Energy Star Products team has also hosted a webinar series featuring inclusive utility investment programs. So why are we so interested in inclusive utility investment? Utilities can make site-specific investments in efficiency upgrades with site-specific cost recovery. All customers are eligible regardless of their income, credit standing, or status as a renter or homeowner. We can see these programs are reaching underserved areas, including persistent poverty areas that are served by rural electric cooperatives that have also validated this concept. Inclusive utility investments and consumer loans are compatible and coexist everywhere that inclusive utility investments is an option. However, the response is fundamentally different because we see near universal eligibility and very high acceptance rates. The potential for adding capital supply lines at the competitive wholesale level could end the redlining of our clean energy economy at the retail level, helping billions of dollars flow into communities served by utilities that already have robust financial infrastructure, rather than relying on each household to individually decide to take on new debt obligation. Looking ahead, utilities that already have the option to make site-specific upgrades or will soon be proposing a program are going to more than double their previous investments using this system, owing mostly to investor-owned utilities in Missouri, which became the first state where electric and gas IOUs are running an inclusive utility investment program using the pay-as-you-save system. Now, Illinois is following suit through the Equitable Energy Upgrade Program in the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. And states in light blue, like California, are in the process of proposed rulemaking to expand inclusive investment solutions. So energy justice is the goal of achieving equity in both social and economic participation in the energy system. And procedural justice is key to that. We know that energy justice requires participation and that a failure to do so will cement the inequities we see today in our future energy system. And you can't let that happen. I also want to share a striking graph of all the US homes upgraded with energy efficiency since 1976 through DOE's Weatherization Assistance Program and utility ratepayer programs. You can see spikes during the stimulus era in 2010 and the current bipartisan infrastructure bill, and then a projection based on historic spending. Altogether, the US has cumulatively upgraded only 6% of our housing stock. This stands in stark contrast to the scale necessary to upgrade all 120 million homes by 2050. For residential energy efficiency alone, we must dramatically increase our pace from 150,000 homes a year to 4 million homes a year. And we need those site-specific upgrades to include full decarbonization packages, not just energy efficiency. So if the people in this room today make a commitment to work together to upgrade all homes, I know we can get there. I want to end with a quote from my American hero, Professor George Washington Carver. He said, "When you can do the common things of life in an uncommon way, you will command the attention of the world." We know it will take increased government funding, new inclusive utility investment programs, and innovative financing mechanisms, all working in concert to bridge the access capital gap we've been discussing. And don't forget the structural health and safety repairs that are so needed to ensure home upgrades are ready. Everyone here today is in exactly the right line of work at exactly the right time to do the common thing in an uncommon way. Thank you so much for your time. Please view me as a partner at DOE and reach out anytime as you think through more equitable solutions for scaling energy efficiency, access, and participation. I know that Holmes, Tammy, and Greg will have a great discussion following this video, and I look forward to joining you all at a future forum. Thank you.
I had a chance to see a preview of that recording, and I'm going to watch it again, even a third time, maybe a fourth time. Dr. Reams's contributions over the last decade to our field have truly shaped and changed the contours that we encounter as we move through it now. I hope that you felt similarly about his investment in your know-how, his contribution, and his dedication to what he would want to share with a room that I know he wanted to be in for the occasion. We're joined today by entrepreneur Tammy Agard, president and founder of the startup called Utility, founded first in Arkansas and now with its headquarters in Kansas City, which we'll hear about. And Greg Hale, Senior Advisor on Energy Efficiency Finance Market Development at the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA. With New York as our host, I think that's most fitting. We're so pleased to have both of you here to participate in this keynote by engaging Dr. Reams's remarks and conversation. And I'm interested to ask you both to greet our attendees with any further depth of background you want to offer by way of introduction, and also a reflection on what resonated with you about Dr. Reams's remarks. Tammy?
All right, well, first of all, I'm starving for onion rings. I've just got a hankering. I don't know about anybody else, but. Well, hello, good morning, everybody. I am just absolutely thrilled to be here. To give you a little context, a little more context than what Holmes and Dr. Reams mentioned, our company, Utility, is a B corporation, woman-owned. We have grown 5 times since COVID, largely due to the interest in the field into inclusive utility investments. Our start really began in rural electric cooperative territories. You might have remembered when you saw Dr. Reams' slide that showed 5 and 6% penetration into rural electric cooperative service territories. Roanoke Electric Cooperative Service Territory in northeastern North Carolina is the 2nd most impoverished county in the United States of America. We started and still run a program called Upgrade to Save based on the pay-as-you-save system there. And just to highlight again, especially when you just listen to those numbers from Dr. Reams, 5 and 6% of their entire service territory, so their entire member base has been served by this program. Likely, or similarly, in Washita Electric Cooperative Service Territory and the Arkansas Delta region, 5 and 6% between there have been served by their pay-as-you-save program. So I've been on the ground level incubating these programs in rural electric cooperative territories, trying to figure out how we scale this inclusive utility investment type program across the country fast. And I am particularly excited to be here today to talk about, later this afternoon, how Missouri has become the first state in the country where all investor-owned utilities in the state either are or will be operating pays by the end of this year. So I'm a boots-on-the-ground perspective. I've had my sleeves rolled up in people's homes, going back actually all the way to 2015 when our company started. And I look forward to sharing whatever insight I can give you today and answering whatever questions you might have. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you, Tammy. Greg, what resonated with you about Dr. Reams's remarks?
Well, we'll get to that in a second, but it's a pleasure to see some familiar faces out there. It's even more of a pleasure to see so many unfamiliar faces, broadening the spectrum of people working on these critical issues. So welcome, and I'll share what I can. I've been at this for a little over 9 years now in New York State, first with the governor's office, now with NYSERDA, really working on building deep efficiency and now building decarbonization. And I guess what resonated with me, first of all, as a proud Wolverine, I'm going to lay claim on the Michigan side of the balance between the Kansas and Michigan for Dr. Reams. I don't know him personally, but a great set of remarks. I'm going to focus on that last little challenge he threw in there. It sort of sounded as an aside, but in the end saying, it's not just deep efficiency we need to roll out in our underserved communities, it's also full decarbonization. And that makes the problem even harder, which means we all need to work even harder to figure out how to accomplish that with projects that don't always throw off the same savings that efficiency does. If they're combined, then you can use the efficiency savings to help with the decarbonization measures, but with the differential in pricing between natural gas and electricity, at least in New York State, there are a lot of electrification projects that don't provide operational savings on the back end. They provide lots of other benefits, but they're hard to quantify. Health, reduction of emissions. So that's a deeper challenge, and that's what we're working on solving in New York, and this financing model could definitely play a role.
Terrific. Tammy, I'm going to ask you to help clarify one part of the remarks that I found needed a little more attention because there was a chart with fonts so small it was hard to read. Specifically, it was field data, like that you've reported from the cases that you know best. There were 3 metrics on that chart, some of which are available online from the Utility Guide for Tariffed On-Bill Programs or the EPA's new Resource Hub for Inclusive Utility Investment. Without revisiting those sites or that chart, the 3 were eligibility, the typical percent of the customer base that's eligible.
Thanks for the question. In a pay-as-you-save or inclusive utility investment program with the right consumer protections, in our experience, that number is everyone. In fact, we don't have an application. It's just an enrollment form. Because we're not qualifying individuals. We're actually letting people enroll and then looking at their home, their apartment, their building to determine what is the cost-effective ability, or what's the need in this location, and will it survive a cost recovery term? So it's based on the building. It's got nothing to do with the individual, absolutely nothing. So everyone.
Well, for those buildings where you do find that there are sufficient operational savings to recover the cost, taking Greg's point that for decarbonization, that creates a new level of requirement for integrating different combinations of upgrades in order to find value streams that can be quantified. But for those energy efficiency programs that you run now, the ones that were profiled, have an acceptance rate that he listed there. The fraction of people who receive an offer with no co-payment, meaning there were cost-effective upgrades to be found at that site, the fraction of people who receive that offer and accept it.
That's astounding. That number is 90+%. But if I can just expand on that for one quick second, 90%. But I would challenge anyone in this room, if your utility came to you and said, we will invest in cost-effective upgrades in your home on your behalf, not as debt. We will recover our investment over time from this tariff location. This is not debt to you. We will do this on your behalf, the cost-effective portion. And all of it was cost-effective? How many people in this room would say no? The hardest part about selling inclusive utility investments to a participant in that situation is they think you're just lying. Why on earth would my utility want to do that? They want to sell me KWH or therms or whatever. They don't want to help me. Why? And that's probably the hardest thing to convince folks of, because that's just what we live in. But that's the truth. So 90% is the answer, 90+%. The only folks who ever turn that down generally are DIY-minded, or they're in some sort of life-changing circumstance, like they're going through a divorce or somebody's got a death in the family or something's happened. And then there's the occasional, we just can't convince them until a year later they come back around and go, well, the program's still here. Maybe you're not trying to rip people off. Can we still enroll? Is that offer still good? So 90%.
Thank you. The movement of the site of financing from qualifying retail customers to business financing between the financial services sector and another part of our economy that's under economic regulation, which is our electric power sector, is actually, I think, the transformative movement that has achieved this grip of attention at the Department of Energy and EPA. They've tried for 10 years to improve the circumstances of qualifying individual counterparties at a household level. Now they're looking at data coming out of the field where the site of the financial transaction is actually at a wholesale level.
So my third and final question on clarifying the data from that table is, what is the fraction of money that's deployed that's actually recovered by the utilities that are deploying millions of dollars?
Well, all of it. It's essentially a no-risk scenario.
He did have a decimal up there. I think it's...
Yeah, it's like 0.01 or something, or 0.1. I don't actually we have not had a disconnect or any kind of non-payment yet in any programs that we operate.
No, that's a slightly different question and not one of the things that was reported on the chart. For the pencil-minded folks in our audience, Tony Reams's chart had in his last line cost recovery rates of 99.9%.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So it's almost all.
Yeah,
But for all of you who are financiers, there's a difference between all and 99.9%.
true.
But you should know that if the charge-off rate is only 0.1%, that finding the reserve fund to mitigate that risk is a much lower toll than some of our other strategies that we're currently using public funds to leverage private capital with. I extended that inquiry to try to make clear why I think Dr. Reams and Administrator Regan have created in the whole of government conversation about energy efficiency finance a new conversation since this formation of the State Energy Efficiency Action Plan during my period of service as the Senior Policy Advisor at the Department of Energy. Greg, I'm going to turn our attention back to New York because the governor of New York has also expressed a similar degree of ambition about scale, keying on Dr. Reams's closing remarks about we need to move to a factor of 10 or more higher in deployment every year. Well, that message has already been received in New York. The governor's State of the State address announced a plan to achieve a minimum of 1 million electrified homes and up to 1 million electrification-ready homes by 2030. And the current rate, just to put that into perspective, is 20,000 homes per year. So the governor is pledging to achieve in the state of New York an increase by a factor of 10 by the end of the decade. That is impressive. With regard to financing, the governor's plan includes two things. And for those of you not familiar, I just want to read them quickly. They're part of Greg Hale's daily fare. Her remarks at the State of the State explained that the plan would include convening the finance, mortgage, and banking industries to help align private capital with this housing sustainability goal. And second, to direct NYSERDA, the Homes and Community Renewal Agency, the Department of Public Service, which is the Utility Commission for New York, and the Department of State to deliver an executable plan to achieve this goal and to deliver that plan this year. It should include a funding proposal and strategies to leverage private capital. Greg, my questions for you are, how is it going? And what challenges are you experiencing in the pursuit that this audience might take interest in?
We're done already. No, it's a massive undertaking. We are, at NYSERDA, are really pleased to be working with Governor Hochul. She has shown herself as a true climate champion. These issues really matter to her, as well as the equity. The other piece of the 2 million climate-friendly homes is that at least 800,000 of those need to be for low and moderate income consumers. So we're working on the plan. Still believe that we will get there at the end. It fits in with a couple of other strategies. One is our carbon neutral buildings roadmap that I've been leading. A second is a sister document coming out called the Building Electrification Roadmap, because electrification is such an important part of decarbonization. And then sort of the near-term action is coming up with this 2 million home plan. And we consider all of those now under the moniker of the future of buildings. So we actually have completed launching into that convening of the mortgage and finance industry, at least round one. The New York Federal Reserve Bank co-convened a group of true experts, high-level individuals from all sectors of the financial world, from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac down to credit unions and large money center banks, insurance industries with real estate developers. So very exciting progress that we've come up with a really interesting list of ideas that we could follow up on. Right now, there are probably too many to dive into and try to get all of them accomplished. So the next idea is to prioritize and then see, as a greedy person, I want to continue getting as much as I can out of this group of volunteers to help us, because the really issue is bandwidth and resources, and what specific financing models are we really going to lean into and try to develop to bring low-cost capital to the critical process of decarbonizing disadvantaged communities. And I would also say that, so that was just one element of it. A white paper will be coming out. The Fed says they're going to get it out in June, so that's extremely impressive. And then we'll figure out how we can translate to execution through that. But I'd also just like to point out, as you mentioned, the governor said it's not just NYSERDA, it's also HCR, Homes and Community Renewal, DPS, our Department of Public Service, and the Department of State, which is basically in charge of all of our building codes. And we are, under the Hochul administration, there really truly is an all-of-government approach in New York State now, where we're finally getting traction with our sister agencies, which, there's inertia that we have to get through in everything. But there's been a real movement in the last year to 2 years that these other agencies are understanding that they now need to integrate climate action into their core missions. And we've had great success with Homes and Community Renewal, a partnership where we're providing incentive dollars into their normal financing structure. That's the easiest way to make things work, is if we can bake climate action into existing financing structures. And they are doing that with their applications for low-income housing tax credit projects and ratcheting up requirements and taking, as I said, our incentive dollars, which we're also doing with the New York City housing agency, so that it's transparent, it's invisible to the borrower. They just think that this is the program and you get this $12,000 or $15,000 or $20,000 subsidy payment into deals, but it's actually coming from us, but there's no second application, or it's just simplified. So, the point I want to get across is you can really make progress with affordable housing agencies, and this came from Pennsylvania. We look around and try to adopt. Now we'll be looking at Missouri. So we try to take the best ideas from around the country and try to adapt them to New York and roll them out.
Thanks for that update, and very promising to think about the interagency cooperation and the path to scale.
It's crucial.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't get there without doing it. That's what the federal government has understood, and they're bringing in the SEC and the EPA and DOE and Department of State, and it's in everything that they do, and that has to be in everything that every state does as well.
Tammy, let's turn attention to Missouri. In fact, I mentioned earlier that you'd made a move from Little Rock to Kansas City, but for good reason. In 2018, ACEEE recognized you as a champion for energy efficiency with a Lifetime Achievement Award, as I understand those things to be. And it was in recognition of your accomplishments in Arkansas, but now there's a bigger playing field in Missouri. Can you tell us how it's going there?
Well, it's super exciting. It was exciting enough. The opportunity showed itself, and it was so exciting that I moved. So that's number one. Not just because of the show Ozark either. Ozark fans. I know where the bodies are buried. No, so I decided that the opportunity was a once-in-a-lifetime shot because I could see the writing on the wall of what was happening from the commission level in Missouri and in my emails, the interest from the investor-owned utilities in Missouri who were reaching out to me, not by the direction of the commission, but voluntarily saying, we want to look at a PAYS program. And so anyway, I actually moved to Missouri for that. We've since launched Evergy PAYS and Ameren PAYS. We've done about 250 homes to date thus far. It's been just about a year, half a year for one of the programs and about a year for the other program. It's going great. The lessons learned in investor-owned utility territories have been a little painful at times, especially post-COVID with supply chain issues and workforce issues and whatnot. But I would say all in all, it's going, in retrospect, it's going better than I could have ever hoped for. But there are also some challenges that have shown up in investor-owned utility territories that I want to share with this group, ways that we could use some help.
Well, we might have time for that here or at the 1 o'clock session.
Right.
I think
Either
that
one,
might be a
right.
better site for it. The both of you indulged me by answering my line of inquiry, which was really motivated by Dr. Reams's closing challenge about scale and hearing from you about how the pursuit of scale, 2 million houses by the end of 2030, and the unprecedented scale that's being pursued in Missouri is definitely both responsive. We have enough time to invite those in the room to raise your own comments or questions. Mr. Wyman, you'll be next. I want to hear if there are any other questions. Go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to engage in this dialogue before we close it out. I've got one in the bleacher seats. What is your name? All right, we'll hear from both of you before we let anybody else? Okay, Mr. Wyman.
Yeah, Greg, great to see you again. You pointed out that today in New York, at least, gas is often cheaper in operating expense than electricity. But I think those of us who follow the rate cases know that in part that's because of essentially screwy accounting. The utilities are now claiming that they'll have 80, 85 years or so to pay off costs, when we know that from the CLCPA, the reality is that they're going to have to recover their costs over maybe 28 years at the most. We also have a situation now where our programs are essentially helping the wealthier people to get off gas and to go to the cheaper, what will eventually be the cheaper technology, the electrically powered heat pumps. And the result is that the low and moderate income people are going to end up being burdened with the costs of the assets that were abandoned by the wealthier people earlier. We essentially have a system which is set up to ensure that the people who can least afford it will end up carrying the costs of the transition. That is in and of itself inequitable. How in the world can we proceed now, with pursuing these programs intended to build equity when the fundamental accounting system, which is driving the consumer decisions, that itself is inequitable and is essentially a counterforce against any of the programs that one might seek to pursue.
Before I let you answer, Greg, there was a second question in the corner.
Yeah, this was for Tammy. So when you're designing your programs, they have to be cost effective for that particular building. Can you hear me?
Louder.
So my question is, when you're designing these projects, are you looking at everything on an individual measure basis or a project level basis? Because there might be a particular measure that on its own is not cost effective, but thrown into a larger project, you're going to generate more savings and all those good things. So how do you design those projects?
Terrific. Mr. Hill?
Answer that simple question from Mr. Wyman. We are super focused on that very issue. Totally aware of it. And as you say, as structured, it could be a very inequitable transition. What we have done so far in New York is the first step of establishing a proceeding at the Department of Public Service to come up with a transition plan for the natural gas system. And the recognition, one of the first principles of this plan is to address the very situation you're talking about. If we, in winding down the system, just do it and have the people who can afford to jump to heat pumps, then yeah, we're going to have a very heavy burden on the people left on the system. So the only way to do this is through long-term planning. There was a bill that didn't actually get passed but was proposed in the governor's executive budget proposals that would start getting at the accounting issues, in particular the 100-foot rule, which allows any property owner to connect to a gas system for free, basically with the cost socialized across all of the other users if they're within 100 feet of a gas line. That bill did not move forward in the legislature this year. We need a lot of people to get their advocacy hats on. Next year is going to be a very important legislative session as we start trying to implement the laws that come out of our scoping plan. That this is all technical, but where we're actually developing the nuts and bolts of the strategy to meet our Climate Act goals. One thing I will say that's relevant to this conversation and Dr. Ream's remarks is, Holmes was reminiscing with me over breakfast that we met each other 8 years ago, and she first brought this inclusive financing concept to our attention, and we certainly gave it a serious tire kicking at the time, but it really ran into resistance at the Department of Public Service at that point, that just was not convinced that this was the right strategy to undertake at that point. But with the requirement in our Climate Act, basically the Justice 40, I'm from New York, so I think everything comes from New York, but I think this one really did. It comes from our Climate Act, which sets a required floor of 35%, but a target of 40% of the benefits of clean energy investment to flow to disadvantaged communities. We acknowledge we're changing everything we do based upon that. And one of the points there is that I had a conversation with the chair of the Public Service Commission, head of DPS, and he told me that New York is open to considering inclusive finance at this point in time, take another look at it and see if it works. So it's not a guarantee that we'll do it, but I think we got another door in to explore the possibility.
That's great news, and thank you for engaging with the depth of detail that you offered in response to a question that I think can frankly be posed in every state. I really don't know any state in the country that doesn't have the dilemma that you're facing, and it's great to get a view from the front. Tammy, do you want to take the question about measure versus project level cost effectiveness?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. So we take a holistic approach to the house as a bundled offer. And so each house tells that story. One house may have adequate attic insulation, but could use a little bit more, but it's not cost effective to invest there. But air sealing wise, it's got the equivalent of a 2 square foot hole in the house. So we've got a big opportunity there. When combined, the savings there with HVAC might help HVAC pencil. But we do have an awful lot of offers that we're seeing in Missouri that have copay requirements. And that's something that's important in an inclusive utility investment program, is that there could be a gap in order for someone to get that holistic upgrade package. Like say it's a $12,000 or $14,000 investment, there could be a $3,000 or $4,000 copay that the participant needs to come up with in order for the utility company to kick in their balance. And I will talk about this more later today, but that's something I definitely wanted to bring the folks in the room that are here for, from the financial entity, financial side of things, to make them aware of that. There is a gap in folks that could, if they had $3,000 or $4,000 available in their line of credit or their credit card, or that they could qualify for, they could take advantage of a $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 upgrade, but they don't have it. Therefore, they cannot participate. So,
Until there's a solution to that
until there's a
problem.
solution to that, which is why I'm excited to talk to you.
Can anyone say loan program office?
You can. So
Just an idea.
Yesterday we heard from the Department of Energy's Loan Program Office. And just to reinforce for those of you who are not here in day one, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act includes a modification to the 4 requirements to have a loan guarantee, and one that has been most troublesome for the most period of time for energy efficiency was effectively struck in the infrastructure bill to allow any energy efficient equipment that is already commercialized to qualify for a loan guarantee in a deployment context. Whereas before, heat pumps, insulation, all of the energy efficient appliances that you can buy from the Energy Star lists were categorically excluded because they were no longer pre-commercial. That changed in September of last year. There is an asterisk over that policy reform, and it is that the Department of Energy's authorities are constrained by what is essentially money that was authorized in the past. So they have new rules, but they don't have any money to go with the new rules. So their new rules will not go into effect until they get new money to go with the new rules. And that could happen in any annual budget appropriation cycle or any future energy bill. And you've heard news in the last 2 weeks that there are some negotiations over both of those topics. So I think that there is some reasonable expectation that new money will come with the new rules. But I think, Greg, that fills in the blanks on what we heard yesterday and how it connects to the energy efficiency financing gap that Dr. Reams brought to us today, both at the household level and at the wholesale level. Friends, we're at time for a program that has a handsome amount of networking time so we can continue these dialogues of interest. Before we close, I want to ask you a favor on my behalf for Dr. Reams. You've heard from me that he really wanted to be here. He closed his remarks by giving you his personal email address and asking you to be in touch. I want to reinforce that by telling you his email address. It is Tony, Tony.Reams, REAMES, at HQ for headquarters, .DOE for Department of Energy, .gov. And my request to you is that you talk to him. Send him an email. He's taking sick leave today with COVID, so I'm sure he'll be interested to hear what folks in White Plains, New York at the Finance Forum had to say about his offering to your career work. He's deeply invested, and your time and attention to reflect back to him what this morning's plenary meant to you, the ideas you're taking away, the inquiries you want to raise with your interagency compatriots and partners in the future, I think will be a gratifying reflection for him to receive. And I'm going to ask you all wave. I'm going to take a photo. Ready? 1, 2, 3. That's great. Now he'll know that the message was really received. Can I ask you to join me in thanking Greg Hale and Tammy Agard for this morning's session? Thank you all very much.